I've never believed in ghosts, but I've always been afraid of them. It was a cold winter evening when we gathered around the fireplace, drinks in hand, conversation drifting from one topic to another. The doctor sat across from us, unusually quiet, his pipe in hand, staring at the ash that collected at its tip. There was something in his silence that made us all pause, something that drew our attention without a word being spoken. "I've had some rather striking experiences," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. He looked up at us, and there was something in his eyes, a shadow, a memory that clearly still haunted him. We exchanged glances around the room. The doctor had seen many things in his career, traveled to remote places, treated all manner of ailments. And in a friendly, intimate setting like this, he'd never been one to hold back his stories. But this time felt different. "Would you like to hear one?" he asked, and I noticed his hand trembling slightly as he raised his glass. "Even now, as I prepare to tell you this, my skin crawls. Even now, years later, I can still feel." He trailed off, taking a long sip of his drink. We nodded eagerly, leaning forward in our chairs. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the windows in their frames. The doctor took a deep breath, set down his glass, and began. "It was a few years ago now. You might remember George Carson, big fellow with a blonde mustache who played for War City. Before he married, when he was studying for his bar exams in the city, I used to see him quite frequently. We'd become good friends, the kind of friends who could talk about anything over a pint or two. It was just after he'd met Miss Stanner, the woman who would soon become Mrs. Carson, that he invited me to a countryside estate his family had rented. 'Come down for a few days,' he'd said enthusiastically. 'Miss Stanner will be there. I'd very much like you to meet her. Fresh air, good hunting, and absolutely no work.' It sounded perfect. I'd been working far too hard, burning the candle at both ends, and a few days of rest seemed like exactly what I needed. I couldn't go for Christmas, I'd promised to spend it with my own family, but around New Year I found myself on a train heading to the countryside, watching the city fade into rolling hills and forests. The closer we got, the more my spirits lifted. This was exactly what the doctor ordered, I thought with a smile. Woodcote, that was the name of the place. Even saying it now sends a slight chill through me, though at the time it seemed like paradise. It was a pleasant estate, easily accessible, with 2 hunting dog packs within easy reach for those who enjoyed the sport. Not too far from the station, you could still get the morning papers if you wanted them, but far enough to feel truly away from the bustle and noise of city life. The air was crisp and clean, the landscape beautiful, even in the dead of winter. George met me at the station himself, all smiles and hearty handshakes. "You're going to love it," he said, as we loaded my bags into the carriage. "We got incredibly lucky with this place. The rent is absurdly reasonable for a house of this size and quality." He explained as we rode that the owner had been forced to go abroad for his health, some lung condition, George thought, though he wasn't entirely sure. The man simply didn't want the house sitting empty all winter, attracting damp and decay, so he'd offered it at a fraction of its worth. "His loss is our gain," he laughed, "though I must say it's a bit of an odd old place. You'll see what I mean." And odd it certainly was. As we approached, I got my first glimpse of Woodcote through the bare winter trees. It was an old house, clearly centuries old, with large bay windows that caught the fading afternoon light. It had that rambling quality that old English country houses often have, additions built here and there over the generations, each architect and owner leaving their mark. There were strange angles everywhere, unexpected corners, and that peculiar asymmetry that comes from organic growth rather than planned design. "Watch your step inside," George warned as we climbed down from the carriage. "The floors are terribly uneven. You can trip on stairs going up or down after just 10 steps in the hallways. I've nearly broken my neck twice already." He said it with a laugh, but I would later remember those words with a different feeling entirely. The interior was just as peculiar as the exterior. Corridors twisted and turned unexpectedly. You'd walk straight ahead and suddenly find yourself at a small flight of stairs, 3 steps down, then 5 steps up. Rooms connected to other rooms in surprising ways. It was the kind of house where you could easily get lost, even after several days of residence. But it had clearly been maintained with care. Someone had put money into it over the years. There was evidence of regular repairs and updates throughout. The most notable addition was a large billiard room that had been built onto the back of the house. "Can't have a proper country house without a billiard room," George said proudly, showing me around. "Especially in winter when the hunting's impossible. Otherwise, it's just a gilded prison, isn't it?" I had to agree. The billiard room was magnificent, well lit, properly heated, with a beautiful table that clearly cost someone a small fortune. The household itself was small and intimate. Besides George, there were his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Carson, both pleasant, proper country gentry. 2 young Carson girls, George's sisters, barely into their teens and hardly worth mentioning in this tale, except that they were there. And then, of course, there was Miss Stanner. And there was me, the guest, the doctor, the friend. I met Miss Stanner that first evening at dinner. She was an attractive young woman, well-bred, well-spoken. George was clearly head over heels in love with her, and I could see why. She had that quality of gentle kindness that makes for a good wife and companion. And George, well, George was a catch by any measure. Not only was he a thoroughly decent fellow in every way, but he was also an only son with considerable expectations. His family wasn't titled, but they were wealthy and respectable. It was, by all accounts, an excellent match. Miss Stanner should have been radiantly happy. Instead, she seemed troubled. I noticed it right away, that first evening at dinner. There was something in her eyes, a distraction, a worry. She would laugh at the right moments, contribute to the conversation appropriately, but it all seemed slightly forced, slightly off. She appeared neither very well nor very happy, and I, with my doctor's instinct for reading people, couldn't help but notice. It was as if her mind was elsewhere, occupied by something she couldn't quite shake free from. This made her alternately tense, gripping her fork too tightly, starting at sudden noises, and then oddly distant, as if she drifted away from the dinner table entirely while her body remained seated. I could tell George had noticed it too. Several times during that first dinner, I caught him watching her with a worried, questioning look. His brow would furrow slightly, his mouth would open as if to ask if she was all right, but then he'd think better of it and return to his meal. Whatever was troubling her, she clearly wasn't ready to share it, at least not yet. But I wasn't there as a doctor. I was there as a friend, as a guest. It wasn't my place to pry or to offer unsolicited medical advice. So I said nothing, enjoyed the excellent meal, and retired to bed thinking that perhaps a few days of country air and rest would do Miss Stanner as much good as it was supposed to do me. Though before I left Woodcote, I would discover the reason for her distress. God help me, I would discover it in the most terrible way possible. The first day and night passed pleasantly enough. We had a grand breakfast, took a long walk around the grounds, despite the cold. The gardens were dormant for winter, but even bare and sleeping, they had a certain stark beauty. George and I spent the afternoon in the billiard room, playing game after game, talking about everything and nothing. It felt good to relax, to let my mind wander away from the pressures of my practice in the city. The cases I'd been handling, the long hours, the difficult diagnoses, all of it seemed to fade away in the peaceful countryside atmosphere. The evening, after dinner, we all gathered in the drawing room. Mrs. Carson played the piano while the rest of us listened or chatted quietly. It was all very civilized, very proper, very English, the kind of evening that's been repeated in country houses across England for centuries. I remember noticing that Miss Stanner seemed a bit better that evening. She smiled more genuinely, laughed at Mr. Carson's jokes. Perhaps, I thought, I'd simply caught her on a bad day. Perhaps there was nothing seriously wrong after all. How wrong I was. It was the second night after my arrival that things began to go strange. I remember it clearly. I'll remember it until the day I die. We'd played a family game of pool after dinner, all of us taking turns around the table. It had been pleasant, full of laughter and friendly competition. But it had also run quite late. Eventually, one by one, people began to excuse themselves and head up to bed. First the two young girls, then Mr. and Mrs. Carson, and finally Miss Stanner, who bid us good night with a tired smile. George and I, being younger and less inclined to keep regular hours, decided to stay up for one last cigarette and a bit more conversation. "Come up to my study," George said. "We can talk without disturbing anyone." His study was a small room he'd arranged for himself on the upper floor, right next to his bedroom. It was separated from the bedroom by thick curtains rather than a door, an odd arrangement, but then everything about Woodcote was a bit odd. It was cozy, though, with a small fireplace, a couple of comfortable chairs.
I should have let George go, or I should have just gone without the pipe. I could certainly have managed one evening. But I'm particular about my smoking, you see. I have my own pipe, broken in just the way I like it, and I never smoke anyone else's. It's a silly habit, I know, but there it is. So down I went to retrieve it. George handed me a candle. "Mind the stairs," he warned. "They're treacherous in the dark." The house was completely dark by then. Everyone else had gone to bed, and we'd only lit a few candles in George's study. As I stepped out into the corridor, the single candle in my hand seemed pitifully inadequate against the vast darkness that surrounded me. I've been in dark places before. I'm a doctor. I've made house calls at all hours of the night. But there was something about the darkness in Woodcote that felt different. It felt thick, oppressive, almost alive. The house looked terrifying in the flickering light of that single candle. Every shadow seemed to move, to reach toward me. The portraits on the walls, and there were many, generations of previous owners, seemed to watch me pass with disapproving eyes. The stairs creaked under my feet, not just with the normal sounds of an old house settling, but with loud, deliberate-sounding groans. It felt, and I know this sounds ridiculous, but it felt as if someone were following me. I kept turning around, holding up my candle, but of course there was nothing there, just darkness and shadows and the sounds of an old house at night. "You're being foolish," I told myself firmly. "Too many late nights and too much work. That's all this is." I found my pipe right where I'd left it, sitting on the edge of the billiard table. I picked it up, tucked it safely in my pocket, and turned to head back. And perhaps I did return a bit more hastily than was absolutely necessary. There was just something about being alone in that vast, dark house that unsettled me in a way I couldn't quite explain. In my haste, and in the dim, inadequate light of the candle, I stumbled on some steps I hadn't noticed or forgotten were there. My foot caught, I lurched forward, and the candle flew from my hand, bouncing once on the floor before rolling away into the darkness. Of course it went out. Candles always go out at the most inconvenient moments, don't they? "Damn," I muttered, dropping to my knees and feeling around for it. After some fumbling in the pitch darkness, my fingers closed around it. But when I reached into my pockets, I realized I had no matches with me. I'd left them back in George's study. So there I was, alone in the dark in this strange old house, unable to see my own hand in front of my face. The logical thing would have been to simply call out for George, or to carefully retrace my steps to his study. But I didn't want to seem foolish. And besides, I told myself, I was a grown man. I could surely navigate a dark corridor. There was a banister along the wall. I'd noticed it on the way down. If I just kept my hand on that banister, I reasoned, I could guide myself back to the stairs and up to George's study. It wasn't far, after all, just one corridor, one set of stairs. I stood up carefully, reaching out until my hand found the smooth wood of the banister. "There," I said aloud, just to hear a voice in the oppressive silence. "Nothing to it." I began to move slowly forward, sliding my hand along the wide banister, feeling my way like a blind man. The corridor was so dark I couldn't even see the vague shapes of things. It was a complete, absolute darkness. I'd moved perhaps 20 feet when it happened. My hand, sliding along the banister, suddenly came upon something that wasn't wood, something cold, something damp. I froze instantly, my heart suddenly hammering in my chest. My fingers had closed around it instinctively, and in that moment of contact, I knew with absolute certainty what I was holding. It was a hand, another human hand. But it wasn't the hand of anyone I knew, anyone who should be in this house. It was thin, emaciated even, with bones clearly visible through the skin. The skin itself was cold, not just cool, but truly cold, like something that had been dead for hours. And it was damp, clammy, with an unpleasant moisture that made my stomach turn. For what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a second or two, I held that hand, too shocked to move, too terrified to let go. And then, slowly, deliberately, it began to slip from my grasp. Not pulling away violently, not jerking free, but sliding with a horrible, controlled motion that suggested intelligence, awareness, intent. I still couldn't see anything. The darkness was absolute, but I could feel that hand sliding through my fingers, could feel each bony knuckle as it pulled free. And then it was gone. Though I heard nothing, no footsteps, no breathing, no rustle of clothing, I was suddenly, absolutely conscious of something passing me. Something moving rapidly past me in the darkness, heading toward the stairs, going up while I stood frozen in place. The air moved as it passed, a cold draft that smelled of earth and decay, and something else, something I couldn't identify that made every primitive instinct in my body scream at me to run. "Hey!" I called out, my voice embarrassingly shaky. "What's that? Who is that? Who's there?" My words echoed in the corridor and died away into silence. Nothing came, nothing but that oppressive, watchful silence. I admit, freely and without shame, that I was terrified, genuinely, deeply terrified in a way I hadn't been since childhood. My hands were shaking, my heart was racing. Cold sweat had broken out on my forehead despite the chill in the house. I didn't wait around to see whatever it was would come back. I felt my way along that banister as quickly as I dared, found the stairs, and practically ran up them. When I burst through the door into George's study, the warm light and the crackling fire felt like salvation. George looked up in surprise. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately. "You look like you've seen a ghost." His choice of words almost made me laugh, but it came out more like a strangled cough. "Nothing," I said, trying to compose myself. "Nothing. I dropped my candle and lost my way. Got turned around in the dark." "You sure?" George asked, peering at me with concern. "You're white as a sheet." "Just stumbled and gave myself a fright," I said, managing a weak smile. "You know how it is in the dark. Imagination runs away with you." "I suppose," George said, though he didn't look entirely convinced. For a moment there, I thought you'd seen someone. You were calling out." "Just cursing at the candle," I lied smoothly. Clumsy of me to drop it. Why didn't I tell him the truth? I've asked myself that question many times since. Partly, I suppose, because I was afraid he'd laugh at me, think I was being hysterical. Partly because I wasn't entirely sure myself what had happened. Had I really touched a hand? Or was it just my imagination playing tricks in the darkness? And partly, I think, because I was afraid. Afraid that if I spoke about it, acknowledged it, made it real with words, then it would become undeniably true. George seemed to accept my explanation, though he gave me a curious look or two. We finished our whiskey, said goodnight, and I went to my room, which was directly across from his. But I didn't sleep well that night, not at all. I kept waking up with the sensation of that damned hand under my own, that cold, damp, bony hand. In my half-sleep, I could feel it writhing as my fingers closed around it, could feel it slowly, deliberately pulling away. Each time I woke, I'd lie there in the darkness. I'd left a candle burning, something I never normally do, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, wondering what I'd touched, wondering what had touched me back, and wondering if it would come back. Morning brought relief, as mornings often do. The sun was shining, the house looked cheerful and normal in the daylight. Whatever I had experienced in the night seemed distant, dreamlike, easy to dismiss. Over breakfast, everyone was in good spirits. Plans were made for the day, a walk for the ladies, some estate business for Mr. Carson. George and I planned to spend the afternoon in the billiard room. "Gotta keep my skills sharp," he joked.
After breakfast, as the others dispersed to their various activities, I made my way to the billiard room to practice some shots by myself. I was lining up a particularly tricky angle when the door opened and Miss Stanner looked in. "Oh, I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't mean to interrupt." "Not at all," I said warmly. "Please come in. George will be back from the stables in a few minutes. We can play a quick game while we wait if you'd like." She hesitated in the doorway, and I saw that the troubled look from the first evening had returned, more pronounced than ever. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her skin pale and drawn. "Actually," she said quietly, stepping into the room and closing the door behind her, "I wanted to talk to you alone, if you don't mind." "Of course not," I said, setting down my cue. "What can I do for you?" But instead of answering immediately, she came to the table and leaned against it with both hands, as if she needed the support. She stared down at the green felt for a long moment, and I could see her hands trembling. Then she looked up at me, and her eyes were filled with a kind of desperate fear. "Do you believe in ghosts?" she asked. The question was so unexpected and so eerily close to my own experience the previous night that I fumbled my response badly. I was just leaning over to take a shot, an easy one, practically impossible to miss, and her question so startled me that I completely botched it. That is, no," I stammered. "No, I don't believe in ghosts." It was a lie, or at least not entirely the truth. I didn't know what I believed anymore, not after the previous night. "But I do believe in hallucinations," I added, trying to sound professional, doctorly. "The mind can play all sorts of tricks, especially when we're tired or stressed or... So if a person were to imagine they were seeing things, there would be a cure for it? A treatment?" I paused, studying her face.
This was clearly more than idle curiosity. "Miss Stanner," I said gently, "are you seeing things?" For a moment, I thought she might deny it, but then her composure, which had been hanging by a thread, simply broke. She turned away from me, walked to one of the comfortable chairs against the wall, sank into it, and began to sob. Not quiet, dignified tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. "Please," she gasped between sobs, "please help me. I think I'm going mad. I think I'm losing my mind." I quickly set down my cue and went to her, kneeling beside the chair. I took her hand. It was hot and feverish, not cold and clammy like the hand I'd touched in the dark, and spoke as calmly and soothingly as I could. "Miss Stanner, look at me. I'm a doctor, and I'm George's friend. Whatever is troubling you, you can tell me, and I'll do everything in my power to help. But I can't help if I don't know what's wrong." She looked at me with red, swollen eyes, and slowly, haltingly, between hiccuping sobs, she told me her story. Since arriving at Woodcote, she'd been waking almost every night at the same time, around 3 in the morning. Not suddenly, not from a nightmare, but slowly, gradually, with a creeping sense that something was wrong. And every time she woke, she would see it. A face. A horrible, twisted face looking at her from above the curtain that stood beside her bedroom door. Just the face, nothing else. Pale, gaunt, with hollow eyes that gleamed in the darkness. The first time it happened, she'd screamed, but the sound had died in her throat, coming out as barely a whimper. By the time she'd gathered the courage to light a candle, the face was gone. She'd convinced herself it was a dream, a product of an unfamiliar room and perhaps too much rich food before bed. But it happened again the next night, and the night after that, and the night after that. Always the same face, always watching her from the same spot, always vanishing the moment she moved. "I thought at first it might be someone playing a prank," she whispered. "One of the servants, perhaps, or even George's sisters. But that's mad, isn't it? Who would do such a thing? And how would they disappear so quickly? Then I thought perhaps it was shadows, tricks of the moonlight. But I've studied it so carefully. There's nothing there that could cast such a shadow, nothing that could look so much like a real face." She gripped my hand tightly. "So that leaves only one possibility, doesn't it? That I'm imagining it, that my mind is creating these visions, that I'm going mad." "You're not going mad," I said firmly. though I wasn't entirely sure if that was true. Hallucinations can be caused by many things: stress, lack of sleep, certain medical conditions. They don't mean you're insane. Have you been sleeping poorly? I barely sleep at all anymore, she admitted. I'm too afraid to close my eyes, afraid of what I'll see when I open them again. And that lack of sleep makes everything worse, I explained. Creates a vicious cycle. You don't sleep, so you see things, so you're afraid to sleep, so you become more exhausted, so you see more things. I stood up, trying to project confidence and competence. I'm going to write you a prescription, something to help you sleep properly. Once you've had a few good nights' rest, I suspect these visions will fade away. You really think so? She asked, hope flickering in her tired eyes. I do, I said, though I wasn't nearly as confident as I tried to sound. Because you see, her description of the face, pale, gaunt, appearing from behind a curtain, matched far too well with what I'd experienced the night before. The cold hand in the darkness, the sense of something passing me by the stairs. If she was hallucinating, then what had I touched? But you mustn't tell George, she said suddenly, gripping my arm. Promise me. He'd worry so terribly, and he has his exams to prepare for. This is supposed to be a pleasant holiday, not this. I won't say anything, I promised, unless you want me to. She left somewhat relieved, her sobs having subsided, clinging to the hope I'd given her. But as I watched her go, I felt deeply uneasy. I'd given her reassurance, but I wasn't sure I believed my own words. I didn't have long to dwell on it, because not 15 minutes later, as I was attempting to refocus on my billiard practice, the door opened again. This time, it was Mrs. Carson. "Doctor," she said with a strained smile, "might I have a word with you, alone?" A cold feeling settled in my stomach. "Of course, Mrs. Carson. Please come in." She closed the door behind her, just as Miss Stanner had done, and came to stand by the billiard table. "It's very convenient having a doctor in the house," she said, attempting lightness, but not quite succeeding. "I was wondering if you might prescribe me something, a sleeping draught, perhaps. My nerves have been a bit troublesome lately." I set down my cue and studied her face. She looked tired, though not as exhausted as Miss Stanner. "What symptoms are you experiencing?" I asked carefully. "Oh, nothing serious," she said with a wave of her hand. "Just difficulty sleeping, and when I do sleep, I have such vivid dreams. Or perhaps they're not dreams at all. I'm not entirely sure anymore." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I knew I already knew. She hesitated, then said, "Do you believe it's possible to see things that aren't there? To see them so clearly that you'd swear they were real, but knowing they can't be?" "You mean hallucinations," I said. "Are they what they're called?" She tried to laugh, but it came out brittle and strained. "Mrs. Carson," gently, "what exactly have you been seeing?" She closed her eyes, as if the memory pained her. "A face, at night, when I wake up. It's there, watching me, so clear, so real. But when I sit up or call out, it's gone, vanished as if it were never there at all." My blood ran cold. The same story, word for word, almost exactly the same as Miss Stanner had told me. "Where do you see this face?" I asked, keeping my voice level with effort. "By my door. There's a curtain there, you see, separating my room from my husband's dressing room. The face appears from behind it, just for a moment, but long enough for me to see every terrible detail." "And what does this face look like?" She shuddered. "Horrible, gaunt and pale, with eyes that seem to catch what little light there is. It's not a kind face, Doctor. It's not the face of anyone I'd ever want to meet in daylight, let alone in the dark of night." "Have you told your husband about this?" "Good God, no!" she exclaimed. "He'd think I was losing my mind, or he'd insist on investigating, turning the whole house upside down. And what would we find? Nothing, because there's nothing there. It's all in my head, isn't it? Just my nerves playing tricks." "Mrs. Carson," gently, "may I ask if you've been under any particular stress lately? Any worries or concerns that might be affecting your sleep?"
"No more than usual," she said. "We're comfortable, the family is well. I have no reason to be troubled, which is what makes this all the more distressing. If I had some cause for nightmares, I could understand it, but this came out of nowhere." I wrote her the same prescription I'd given Miss Stanner, a mild sedative, something to promote deep, dreamless sleep. As I handed it to her, I said, "Mrs. Carson, I want you to take this for the next few nights, and I want you to try not to worry. The mind can do strange things when we're overtired, and the cure is often as simple as good rest." "You really think so?" she asked, hopefully. "I do," I said, though I wasn't nearly as confident as I tried to sound. Because you see, two women, unrelated, of different ages, in different parts of the house, seeing the same thing. And me touching something cold and bony and wrong in the darkness. Hallucinations don't work that way. Mass hysteria requires communication, suggestion, a shared context. These women hadn't spoken to each other about their experiences. I was certain of that. So what were we all experiencing? As Mrs. Carson left, thanking me profusely, I stood alone in the billiard room and felt the first real stirrings of fear. Not the sudden terror of touching something in the dark, but a deeper, colder fear. The fear of facing something I couldn't explain, couldn't rationalize, couldn't treat with medicine or reason. By then, a conviction had formed in my mind. Something was wrong in Woodcote, something that couldn't be treated with sleeping draughts and reassurances. But I wasn't ready to admit that yet. Not to George, not to his family, and certainly not to myself. I decided to keep quiet, at least for now. I'd given my word to both Miss Stanner and Mrs. Carson that I'd keep their confidences. And besides, what would I say? That I thought the house was haunted based on one strange touch in the dark and 2 reports of nightmare visions? George would think I'd lost my mind. Mr. Carson probably asked me to leave. And my own experience, well, that could still be explained away, couldn't it? A curtain blowing in a draught? My imagination, stirred up by the darkness and the strange house. I almost convinced myself. Almost. That day was Sunday. The family prepared for church, as respectable country families do. I made my excuses. A slight headache, I claimed, from too much fresh air after the stuffy city. Nothing serious, but I thought I'd rest rather than sit through a long service. The truth was, I wanted to explore the house, to look for some rational explanation for what was happening. Once everyone had left, their voices and the sound of the carriage fading down the drive, I began my investigation. I started with the corridor.
I saw it for only a few seconds, but those seconds are burned into my memory forever. It was human, or had been human once, but there was something terribly wrong about it. The skin was gray-white, stretched tight over prominent bones. The eyes were sunken but somehow bright, reflecting the firelight with an unnatural gleam. The mouth hung slightly open, revealing glimpses of teeth that seemed too long, too yellow. But it was the expression that truly horrified. It wasn't malevolent exactly, but it wasn't human either. It was the expression of something that had forgotten what it meant to be human, something that existed outside the normal rules of life and death. It looked at us, really looked at us, and in that gaze I felt recognized, acknowledged, seen in a way that made my skin crawl. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. The curtains fell back into place as if nothing had happened. For a moment, neither George nor I moved. We couldn't. Terror had frozen us both in place. Then George broke the spell. "Did you see that?" he gasped. "Yes," I managed to say. "I saw it. So I'm not mad. It was really there." "It was really there," I confirmed. George grabbed the poker from beside the fireplace, weighing it in his hand. "Right, that's it. We're finding out what this is now." "George, wait!" But he was already moving, striding toward the bedroom. "No more waiting, no more wondering. Whatever that was, it was in my room, right behind that curtain. We're going to find it." I followed him through to the bedroom, my heart racing. George ripped the curtain aside with his free hand, the poker raised in the other. The bedroom was empty, completely, utterly empty. The lamp was burning on the bedside table, casting a warm, steady light. Nothing was out of place. George checked the wardrobe, empty. Under the bed, nothing. Behind the door, clear. He went to his bedroom door, which opened onto the corridor, and threw it open. "Hello?" he called out. "Is anyone there?" The corridor was empty and silent. We stood there, both breathing hard, both gripping our makeshift weapons. I'd grabbed a candlestick without really thinking about it. "It was here," George said. "We both saw it. It was right there, between those curtains, looking at us." "I know," I said, "but it's gone now, wherever it went." George's jaw clenched. "Then we search the whole damned house, top to bottom. We don't stop until we find—" He was interrupted by a sound that made my blood turn to ice. A scream, a woman's scream, coming from downstairs. Not a scream of surprise or anger, but a scream of pure, absolute terror, the kind of scream that comes from the very depths of human fear. A scream that told us, more clearly than words, that someone had just looked into the face of their worst nightmare. George and I looked at each other for just a split second, and then we were running. Out of his room, down the corridor, toward the stairs. Behind us I heard doors opening, Mr. Carson calling out, the young girls crying. But we didn't stop. We knew, both of us, whose scream that had been. Miss Stanner. The house, which moments before had seemed empty and quiet, was suddenly full of sound. Footsteps thundering, voices calling, that terrible scream still echoing in our ears, even though it had stopped. We took the stairs down at a dangerous speed, nearly tripping in our haste. The corridor below was dark, so dark, but we could see a strip of moonlight coming from an open door. Miss Stanner's room. As we reached the bottom of the stairs, I felt it again, that presence, that thing passing close by me, so close I could feel the cold emanating from it, could smell that earth and decay smell. I turned instinctively, reaching out, trying to grab it. My hand closed on nothing but air, but I knew it had been there. "Did you feel that?" I gasped to George, but he wasn't listening. He had reached Miss Stanner's door and calling her name. I abandoned my futile grasping at shadows and ran after him. What we found in that doorway is a sight that will stay with me until my dying day. Miss Stanner lay on the floor, just inside her room, collapsed at the threshold. She was in her white nightgown, her hair loose around her shoulders. For one horrible moment I thought she was dead, but then I saw her chest rising and falling rapidly, too rapidly. She was unconscious, her face white as paper, her lips slightly blue. George dropped to his knees beside her, calling her name, patting her cheeks, trying to wake her. Behind us, the household was gathering. Mrs. Carson appeared, wrapped in a dressing gown, her face horrified. Mr. Carson was shouting for the servants, demanding to know what had happened, who had screamed, what was going on. But George ignored him. He turned to me, his face set with determination. "We're finding it, right now. Whatever it is, wherever it's hiding, we're finding it and ending this tonight." "George, perhaps we should wait until morning," his father started, but George cut him off. "No, no more waiting. It's been terrorizing the women, terrorizing all of us. It was in my room an hour ago. It was just here, in this corridor, and we're going to find it." He looked at me. "You felt something, didn't you? On the stairs. I saw you reaching for something." "Yes," I admitted. "Something passed me, going up the stairs." "Then that's where we start," George said. He turned to his father. "Sir, I need you to stay here. Protect the women. Don't let anyone be alone. Can you do that?" Mr. Carson, seeing the steel in his son's eyes, nodded slowly. "All right, but George, be careful." "Careful went out the window when that thing made Miss Stanner scream like that," George said grimly. He went to the hallway closet and pulled out a heavy walking stick, basically a club. He also retrieved a large lantern and lit it. "Doctor," he said, looking at me. I picked up the poker I'd dropped when we found Miss Stanner. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was better than nothing. "Lead the way," I said. And so, in the dead of night, in that old house that suddenly felt full of watching eyes and malevolent presence, we began our hunt.
We started by going back up the stairs to where our rooms were. George went to his room first, checking again, even though we'd just been there. Nothing had changed. The curtains hung innocently. The room was empty. My room was the same, undisturbed, ordinary, showing no signs of intrusion. "Then where did it go?" George said, frustrated. "Where did it go?" I stood in the corridor, trying to remember. The thing had passed me going up the stairs, but our rooms were right here at the top of the stairs. Unless... "George," I said slowly, "these stairs, do they go anywhere else? Anywhere beyond our rooms?" He thought for a moment. "Yes," he said. "At the end of the corridor there's a door. I've never opened it. I assumed it was just a cupboard or something." "Show me." We walked down the corridor, past our rooms, past 2 or 3 closed doors that led to guest rooms currently unused. At the very end was a door, smaller than the others, looking old and unused. There was no key in the lock, but when George tried the handle, it opened easily. Beyond was darkness and a set of steep, narrow stairs leading up. "Where does this go?" I asked. "The attic, I suppose," George said. "I didn't even know this door was here until a few days ago. It's not on any of the plans Mother had drawn up." We looked at each other. The attic, of course. Where else would something hide in a house like this? "We should get help," I said. "More men, more lights. There's just the servants, and I'm not sending them up there. This is our job." He raised the lantern. "After you, Doctor." I wanted to argue, wanted to suggest we wait until daylight, wanted to do anything other than climb those dark, steep stairs into an attic that could contain God knows what. But Miss Stanner's screams were still echoing in my mind. Mrs. Carson's frightened face, the cold hand I'd touched in the darkness. Someone had to do this, and that someone, apparently, was us. "Stay close," I said, and began to climb. The stairs were narrow and steep, clearly not meant for regular use. They creaked alarmingly under our weight. The air grew colder as we climbed, and there was a smell, musty and unpleasant, the smell of a space long closed up. At the top was another door, this one partially open. George raised the lantern higher, and we stepped through into the attic. It was a large space, low-ceilinged, with exposed beams and a rough plank floor. Our lantern cast strange, dancing shadows that made every corner seem to hide something. There were old boxes stacked here and there, furniture covered in dusty sheets, broken chairs, empty picture frames. The detritus of generations, the things too good to throw away but not good enough to keep in the main house. We moved slowly, carefully checking behind every box, every shrouded piece of furniture. Nothing, just dust and cobwebs and old forgotten things. "Maybe it went somewhere else," George whispered. The attic seemed to demand whispers. "Maybe we were wrong about..." Then we stopped. We both stopped, because we'd heard it again, that sound, that half moan, half sigh. And it was coming from the far corner of the attic, where the shadows were deepest. We moved toward it, George holding the lantern high, me gripping the poker so tightly my knuckles were white. As we got closer, we could make out more details. In the corner was what looked like a makeshift wall or partition, roughly constructed from old planks. And at the base of this partition was a ladder, crude, obviously recently made, leading up to a trapdoor in the ceiling. "That leads to the roof space," George whispered. "There's a crawl space up there, between the roof and the attic ceiling. It's barely tall enough to crouch in." The sound came again, definitely from above us, from beyond that trapdoor. Whatever was in this house, whatever had been terrorizing us all.
Some mysteries are better left in the darkness where we found them. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe. There are more tales waiting in the shadows. Until next time.